And this shows the importance of applying the Sharia, right? That hadith is saying that as long as these rulers don't apply the Sharia, they're going to continue fighting. It means they're going to be divided, right? So that means that if the rulers are advised and shown, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us better rulers who apply the Sharia, if the more Sharia is applied, the more these rulers will cooperate with each other. And the more they will unite and the more they will cooperate, bi'idhnillah, right? So in this chapter, I'm talking about whose responsibility is it? Is it just anybody in the ummah? Because Hizb ut-Tahrir makes it out to sound like, well, all of us are in sin because there's no Khalifa that's established over all the Muslims. Again, in Muslim history, various scholars who said that the Khilafah is an obligation, they said this. Many scholars have said this. The Khilafah is an obligation. What do they mean by that? Did they mean that the Khilafat al-Nubuwwah was an obligation? Ibn Taymiyyah said it. He mentioned it in one of his writings, right? But does that mean that all the different forms of governance that happen after, that those are haram, that those are not allowed, that those are illegitimate ways of ruling? You know, the hereditary monarchy that we had that took place ever since Muawiyah radiallahu anhu gave it to his son Yazid, right? And Yazid, you know, he's not a Sahabi, right? He made mistakes, no doubt about it, and he wasn't the ideal leader. But Muawiyah gave it to him because he saw it that his son was able, and there were circumstances at that time because Muawiyah, Al-Hasan radiallahu anhu, he gave up the Khilafah and gave it to Muawiyah, and Muawiyah said about himself, I'm the first king, and the monarchy started, right? So Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, because he was the ruler of Sham at the time, he ruled the Sham. Banu Umayyah, they supported him a lot. So for him at that time, one of the reasons why he appointed his son Yazid is because if he appointed anybody else, then there would have been a lot of problems and people would not have accepted it. So again, this is a detailed topic that went to the history and the reasons why he did it and so on. But you're going to find later on that this is something that they use, unfortunately in a bad way, when looking at some of these personalities. So when looking at a possible union between Muslims today, this is something that is up to the people that are in the political realm. It's not just for anybody to come and try to create a group here, create a group there, and recreate history again and say, well, we're back to the Meccan period again, and the whole world is Dar al-Kufr, as if no Muslim exists today. Today we have Muslims, we have 1/4 of the earth is Muslim, we have nation state. So you can't make qiyas with today's situation as it was before Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam migrated to Medina. And that's what these brothers are doing, which I think is a very big mistake on their part. Now, this first part of the book I get into is all to do with the political aspect of it. Of course, I could not ignore the Aqidah matters. Chapters 12 to 14, I dealt with Aqidah matters. Hizb ut-Tahrir spoke about Al-Hasan al-Basri, which we know is a very pious tabi'i. But then they put him along with Wasil ibn Ata, who's the founder of the Mu'tazila, Ghalan al-Dimashqi, who's a Qadari, who was executed by the Khalifa of his time because of his beliefs in Qadar, and Al-Jabal ibn Safwan, and others. They grouped them all as defenders of Islam. So Hizb ut-Tahrir is very neutral when it comes to the different Aqidah that is in the Ummah. Even if his Aqidah is something heretical, they have no problem with the Shia, for example. They think the Shia are fine and dandy and we can get along with them as long as we establish the Khilafah. They have no issues with that. And I get into that in the book in a lot of detail. Their definition of Iman, I get into that. They don't consider actions to be part of Iman. This is part of the definition. So they're more towards, I'm not saying they're Murji'ah per se, but they have aspects of the Murji'ah, right? Names the attributes of Allah. They look at them in the sense that, they look at them in the sense of tafweed, that they have no meanings that we know of, that the names and attributes of Allah in the Quran or the Sunnah, there's no meanings to those words. We just leave it up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we just don't even give them meanings, period, right? Which is not the way of the Salaf actually. Hizb ut-Tahrir, with the issue of ahadith as well. I get into this particular topic in detail about whether to take aqidah from hadith ahad. And they say, no, you can't take aqidah from hadith ahad. In fact, they say it's haram to do that. That's how far they go with it. And I go to the origins of that. It goes back to Wasil ibn Ata, it goes back to the Mu'tazila, it goes back to those groups that started off by saying that, well, hadith ahad can be taken into aqidah. And classifying hadith, by the way, nothing is wrong with saying ahad and mutawatir. But when you start to deny ahad in the way that they've done, this is where the problem is. Chapter 15, I talk about the Mahdi. And I even, this is one of the things I have in the book here, one of two things or three things when they talk about the Mahdi, and about him reestablishing the Khilafah and so on. Can it be established without him? They were asked the question, they said, no, there's no definitive evidence in the Quran or the Sunnah for such an understanding. In fact, there are authentic hadith which indicate that Imam Mahdi will descend at a time when people are arguing about the succession of a Khalifa. A very detailed topic, which implies that there already exists a Khilafah, There's already a caliphate when he comes, and they say the commands by Allah is true by Islam are decisive, and again to the end of it, right? So they don't believe in the Mahdi in the sense that this is something that is definitive, right? They say that, well, maybe not, right? Because again of this ahad hadith and the mutawatir hadith, but the reality is even the issue of the Mahdi is mutawatir bil ma'na, that the hadith about the Mahdi are concurrent in terms of their meaning. They're not concurrent in terms of exact wording of hadith, but they're concurrent, recurringly concurrent, and they're mutawatir at the level of definitiveness, right? That there will be somebody who will come and will establish the khilafah at the end of time. Now does that mean they'll go to sleep and say, let's wait for the Mahdi? That's what some people think. You guys are just saying sleep. No, there are things that we have to do for this as well. One of them is, like I had in the earlier chapter, in the inevitable caliphate, is that the Muslims should try to with themselves their best to apply the Sharia and try to unite some of these fragmented states and bring them together at the political level, right? But when the Mahdi comes, there's going to be a different kind of detail. And I argue in my book that as far as the Khilafat an-Nubuwwah is concerned, in its pure form, that's what the Mahdi will do. What happens before that in terms of a potential caliphate in the sense of having unity between Muslims coming together under less leaders perhaps, or maybe one leader, Allahu A'lam, that can happen. But in its pure form, the way that the Khulafa Rashidun had it, this will be the Mahdi and will not be anybody before him. Some scholars among the Sunnah, they don't agree with that. Some of them said this is how it is, some of them said no. When I looked at it myself, looked at the hadith of the Mahdi and so on, I came to that conclusion that from the hadith and the way the transition is, it makes sense to me that the Mahdi will be the one to do it. Again, it doesn't mean that we slack off and don't do anything. There is work to be done, whether it's at the individual level or the institutional level or the societal level or the government level. There's lots of work to be done. Chapter 16, I talk about the tafsir al-siyasi lid-din, the political pan-Islamic worldview in its terms on Islam, right? This is a deep topic as well, because to understand these groups, whether it's Hizb al-Tahrir or Ikhwan al-Muslimun or Jama'at al-Islami, Abu al-Ala al-Mawdudi, rahimahumullah, and so on, to understand the ideology of these groups, you have to understand the tafsir al-siyasi that they came up with. All or almost all of Islam is interpreted to a political worldview, and hence its true maxims are compromised. When I went through it, this is one of the longer chapters in my book. When I went through this, right, the worship, the acts of worship that we have, you find that many of them have become something secondary. So the rites of worship in Islam are undermined and become the means, and Islam loses its true essence. So for example, they say that, like Hizb al-Tahrir is saying, well, establishing the prayer means establishing the foundation of the religion. You're undermining the prayer. And people with he said prayer as a means. So even the trip of Al-Mi'raj, he said that when the Rasul ﷺ that in the ascension, the prayer is only a means to that. And this is what he said. Even though the first thing on the day of Qiyamah we're going to be asked about is the prayer, before any khilaf or anything like this, right? And you find, unfortunately, with some of the writings of these people who make Islam to be a political movement primarily, is that they disrespect the prophets of Allah who did not establish governance, right? Because not all the prophets of Allah established governments. In fact, most of them didn't.